There have, unfortunately, been a few times where Disneyland was not exactly the happiest place on Earth. Even with its nickname, the Magic Kingdom, a handful of tragedies have made Disney's use of smoke and mirrors go awry.
Cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness!
In September of 2003, one of the theme park's most recent deaths occurred inside the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad ride at Frontierland. It was only a couple of hours after the park opened that day, and ride operators began to report of strange clanking sounds coming from one of the passenger cars. The plan was to then have the ride operate for 13 more trips until they would put it out of service for maintenance. It was on the very last trip when mayhem started to go down. 22-year-old Marcelo Torres and 3 of his friends were the next guests to enter the attraction. During the segment of the ride where the train soars through a dark tunnel, 2 bolts from the left guide wheel assembly disconnected, and the train's axle jammed severely. The locomotive hit the top of the tunnel, and the lead passenger car crashed into the undercarriage. Marcelo died from blunt force trauma to the chest, which caused his lungs to fill up with blood. 10 other guests were injured, some taken to hospitals and treated for moderate injuries. The ride was reopened in March of the following year, and safety and maintenance protocol were updated extensively. It was during Disney's annual grad night in 1966 where a fatal incident occurred involving a high school student from Northridge, California, attempting to sneak into the park. 19-year-old Thomas Cleveland tried bypassing the main gate by getting over the 16-foot outer fence and climbing onto the tracks of the Disney monorail. The plan was to crawl over the tracks where he could jump off the other side, although his plan failed. Security guards began shouting at Thomas to get down. Assuming that they were just yelling at him for his misbehavior, Thomas ignored them and continued. He then realized that the real reason they were shouting was because the monorail train was coming towards him. He sought protection from the track's fiberglass canopy, but it wasn't deep enough. Thomas was crushed to death, and his body dragged for around 40 feet across the track. The scene was so gruesome that a guard claimed that he had to hose the kid off the underside.
Hello everyone, welcome to our presentation of America Sings. Please feel free to clap and sing along, but please remember, no flash pictures.
On July 8, 1974, a tragic freak accident occurred in Tomorrowland that killed 18-year-old Deborah Stone. It was only 9 days after the park opened its brand new attraction, America Sings, a vaudeville show with audio animatronics that would take the audience through different time periods in American history. The ride was designed as an outer ring, which surrounded 6 theaters, with the ring rotating to each theater to transition to the next part of the show. It was the last show of the day at around 10:30 p.m. Deborah was a new Disney employee, and her job that day was to be the hostess for the new ride, which involved speaking to the audience through the intercom and guiding them to their seats. As the ring was moving to the next theater, Deborah was caught between the rotating and stationary walls and was crushed. One audience member reported to the ride operators of hearing a blood-curdling scream come from the next theater, while other guests dismissed it, thinking that it was part of the show. Deborah was pronounced dead at 11 p.m. after her dismembered and mangled body was found between the stage and audience area. Consequently, the ride was closed for 2 days, and additional safety features were implemented. America Sings officially closed in 1988, but future carousel rides were remodeled with breakaway walls to prevent similar incidents from ever happening again. Another incident, which also occurred in Tomorrowland, led to the very first and only murder to have ever occurred inside the Disneyland park. It was March 7th, 1981, and Disneyland was hosting a private party for a local defense contractor. Among those close by were 18-year-old Mel Yorba and a few other young people who were out simply to have a good time. Right next to the Skyway attraction, an altercation started between Mel and 28-year-old James O'Driscoll, who accused Mel of touching his girlfriend. During the fight, a knife was pulled, and Mel was stabbed to death. Standing trial, James claimed that he did not stab Mel, but instead Mel lunged towards him during the fight and accidentally ran into his knife. But juries dictated that this was likely not the case, and James was therefore charged. Disneyland was sued by Mel's family for $60 million, but based on the circumstances of the event, the judge ultimately decided that Disney was not at fault, but they were ordered to pay the families $600,000 for the negligence of not providing medical assistance in a timely manner. A series of teenage antics that occurred in Fantasyland in 1964 would soon become the very first death to have ever occurred at Disneyland. 15-year-old Mark Maples of Long Beach, California, and a few of his friends were riding the park's signature roller coaster, the Matterhorn. During the ride, a friend unfastened Mark's seatbelt as a practical joke, but what ended up happening next would be anything but funny. Mark then stood up from his seat as the vehicle was soaring at high speeds. Just as they reached the peak of the mountain, Mark was thrown from his seat and smashed his head and ribs on the track below and ruptured his organs. He was rushed to Palm Harbor Hospital in critical condition with a fractured skull and broken ribs. He died 3 days later. Mark's family filed a lawsuit against Disneyland, but since nothing could have prevented what happened, the case turned in Disney's favor. Another kid that had known Mark, named David, recollects the kind of impact that Disney's first casualty had on his life. He claimed that although Mark's death had quickly become a story of legend, it also became a story which marked an end to childhood innocence.
Oh, I didn't mean to frighten you prematurely. The real chills come later.